This week's episode of our show has been sponsored by our very own Kickstarter project, Sebastian Crow's Guide to Drakenheim.
Sebastian Crow's Guide to Drakenheim is going to introduce a ton of new player content as well as expanded lore on the world surrounding the city of Drakenheim. This book is perfect whether or not you backed our first Kickstarter because it is full of player-focused content that can be used in any setting, as well as great lore that you can use to inspire adventures, campaign ideas, or even just rumors and stories in your own worlds.
We've spent the past couple of years playtesting, workshopping, and developing a brand new class for 5th edition, the Apothecary, which is featured in this book. The Apothecary is an occult magician that combines medical knowledge with arcane magic, using intelligence-based spellcasting mechanics alongside interesting powers that let them harm and heal in equal measure.
We've also created brand new subclasses, at least one for every core class in D&D. And on top of that all, we've created a number of brand new spells that are available to all the classes, but also all of them are available to the Apothecary. And they focus on heightening the abilities of poison damage, acid damage, and necrotic damage in your games of D&D.
We've worked so hard on all the content in this next new book, and we are so excited to share it with you. If you'd like to get information on the Kickstarter campaign and find out when you can start backing it, follow the links in the description below.
And now, onto this week's episode.
Greetings! My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything D&D, including advice for players and guides for Dungeon Masters.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we are continuing our class tier ranking series in D&D 5e and looking at which of the core classes in 5th edition makes for the best Negotiator.
Negotiators are deeply rooted in the social interaction pillar of play, but this doesn't include role-playing. Everybody can role-play really, really well. That doesn't make your character a great negotiator. So we are looking for skills, abilities, and spells that the classes have access to that allow them to lean into the social interaction role to solve problems at the table.
Social encounters can be tricky because they're usually non-combat encounters that have a little bit more of a interpersonal puzzle to them. So an example of a social encounter might be something like the player characters need to negotiate an alliance, or they might need to make a bargain or a deal with some sort of non-player character or monster. Perhaps they have to convince a dragon who is too powerful for them to defeat in combat to leave the village at peace.
The player characters might also want to diffuse a hostile situation without bloodshed, so they want to talk to the NPCs and talk them down from their hostile state. Also, negotiation could be manipulation. This might be where something like using a spell to read somebody's mind, or a spell for mind control or charm, might be very useful for negotiation purposes. If you can convince the NPCs to do what you need them to do, that, in a way, is negotiation. If you look on the screen right now, you're going to see the rankings that we use to determine who we think the best negotiator is. Monty and I are only going to award one S tier to the class that we think is the best. So the S tier needs to be the best in the game regardless of how you build them. Meanwhile, the A tier is one that's going to excel in this role pretty much no matter how you build them. A B tier has many options to be really powerful in this role, but you're going to have to build them to be good at it. A C tier might have a few options, but you're going to have to pick very specific subclasses, spells, or abilities in order to excel in the role. And a D tier isn't going to have a lot of options available. There might be one or two possible options, but you really need to choose a very specific avenue to be a good negotiator.
Any class in the game can choose to not dump their charisma score and grab proficiency in persuasion from their background. Because of this, we need to set the bar a little bit higher than that for what makes someone a good negotiator, because fundamentally any character can do that. So with the negotiators in particular, we're looking for classes that offer much more than just do you have a not negative charisma score and proficiency in the persuasion skill to give them a high ranking.
There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling. So let's kick things off with the Artificer. I think that I have a couple points for the Artificer, but it's probably not enough to save them to make them a good negotiator. These are gruff mechanics, not really negotiators. I will say that there is a way to use some tool proficiency like a disguise kit and a forgery kit to help with negotiations. But I think the Artificer could help by using their tools, but they're probably not the person doing the talking.
There's not really much to incentivize an Artificer to invest in their charisma score. And while there are some spells and infusions that they can take, anyone can always use Enhance Ability to give themselves advantage on charisma checks. So they do have options there. But I still think that you're going uphill. I think the question with the Artificer is, even if you took everything that the Artificer possibly has to offer and really built an Artificer to be a negotiator, where's it going to land in relation to your other abilities?
In relation to all of the other classes, if we look at the spectrum, not high.
I feel like even if you did choose every option and spell that the Artificer could possibly gain access to, and there are a few, I think that you would still end up with the struggle of you're compromising your other strengths the whole time.
Yeah.
So this is one of those cases where you could build an Artificer to be a negotiator at the expense of the Artificer's other competencies.
And you're not as good of a negotiator as you would have been if you had invested in what the Artificer's great at.
Yes.
And so I think it's a D ranking.
I could see an argument for there being a C ranking, but I do think that it is one of those cases where, yeah, you have to actively make the character to do it. An Artificer could have a decent charisma score by having it as their tertiary ability. But even if you're doing point buy, it's going to be really hard to justify that. It's really hard, I think, for any of the intelligence-based spellcasters. It's really a challenge to justify having that good charisma score. And the skill isn't the be-all and end-all. It's still the baseline. I feel like giving it a C acknowledges that there's at least something that you could do here. But it really is borderline D for me because it very much comes at the expense of your other competencies.
I think it's a D ranking in my books, but we can say CD.
Yeah. Barbarian.
Yeah.
Once again, there are some Barbarian subclasses that might give you the ability to intimidate someone better.
Yes.
And there are some Barbarian subclasses that might allow you to be a little bit of a leader. Or I don't think we've really seen a Barbarian subclass yet that really is I would love to see a Barbarian subclass that was like a Skald, that was like a Barbarian Bard or a Barbarian, or something that really leaned into the Barbarian as the leader. But I don't think we've seen that yet in 5th edition.
I love that trope. I think it's a great trope. I think that barbarians are really great for role-playing a person who stands up at the front and is a leader to their people and can talk and negotiate and is political. They just happen to be from a group of warriors that are really muscly and scary and intimidating and like to smash things with axes. But that is such an awesome trope. Sadly, I don't think it plays into the rules that we have.
No, I think it's a real uphill struggle. And once again, sure, your Barbarian could have a good charisma score. Your Barbarian could take Inspiring Leader. Your Barbarian could take a feat to give them expertise and persuasion. But fundamentally, that's all you're going to have. You might have some Frightful Presence stuff, depending on what subclass you have. I think it's mostly orienting you still to be an intimidating and scary warrior and not a smooth talker.
Yeah, and I think, we're not talking about role play. And I think, again, I love the trope of the barbarian who is like the noble barbarian.
Yeah.
But the way that the rules are going, I think I have to give the barbarian a D. But a D doesn't mean there's no options. It means that you could build it. But again, I think you're taking away from the strengths of the barbarian by investing more into trying to make them charismatic and good at negotiating.
I really wish with the Barbarian it wasn't such a one-track class. Because in so many ways, the Barbarian has been given more skill proficiencies in 5th edition than ever before. There are more flexibilities and options for the Barbarian in 5th edition compared to prior editions. But it still feels like there needs to be a couple extra abilities beyond just having skill proficiency that let you define other ways your characters can be good at. It would be really cool if there was some way that charisma was a relevant stat for a barbarian to build their character. Because it feels like that should be something that exists, but it doesn't.
I also feel like I want to say for the barbarians that we've handed out a lot of Ds for the barbarian. We have given them a few A's, and they probably have a few more coming. The Barbarian is amazing at what they're amazing at, and I will say this as a statement. I have seen countless Barbarians in our games. Not a single player who's played a Barbarian has ever had a bad time playing one.
Yeah.
They have some of the most fun at the table, because if you are into the playstyle of the Barbarian, you go in hard and you have so much fun doing it. And you can role play. You can challenge negotiations. You can be stealthy if you really want to. There are avenues for you to be the Barbarian you want to be. It's just that when you are trying to branch out from being the big meat shield who smashes things with an axe, you're actually taking away from what the Barbarian is best at in interesting ways. And no matter what, you're going to have fun playing a Barbarian. There's a Barbarian at my table right now who loves getting into combat encounters, and every time they're in one, they feel like the rock star, and they are.
But it's just that I think as a Barbarian player, I don't know how you could ever feel like the rock star negotiator of your party unless somehow you were either the main character of the campaign and the dungeon master was really feeding it to you.
Yeah.
Right.
Also, if you have a dungeon master who's really open to interpretation of, is the player good at talking, then I'm going to give it to them.
and that's really a tricky thing too, because some players are not good at talking but want to play as a charismatic negotiator, and we have to strike that middle ground, because if you allow the person who in real life is a smooth talker to always negotiate their way out of every situation, even though they're playing the 6 charisma gruff dwarf barbarian. Whereas if you've got a player who is a little bit more reserved and they have decided, I would like to play a bard who has a 20 charisma and take an expertise, but yet they're not themselves in real life eloquent, you have to meet that player halfway, because they still are deserving of realizing that fantasy, right? And that's where we come to the bard, I think, because we already have an example of how good the bard can be.
The bard is built to be the negotiator. There's no question about it, and I don't think we're surprising anybody in this episode when I say that the bard is my S-tier negotiator.
I think it's no contest.
You have charisma as your spellcasting ability, so you're going to blast your charisma up to 20 if you can, plus 5. So already your persuasion, deception, and intimidation are going to be better than almost every other class in the table.
Yeah.
Not only that, but you get expertise as a bard.
Yep.
Bards get expertise. That means they get to double their proficiency in whatever skills they want to pick. And as a bard, I'm picking persuasion, deception, or intimidation as one of those skills. Yes. Maybe even 2. So that's definitely going to be a choice. And a lot of bards are going to go that route. So you already are proficient in these skills. You're going to have expertise. And then to kick it all into 10th gear, sure, you have spellcasting. Full spellcaster.
Full spellcasting with the best selection of enchantment, illusion, and other social interaction spells. You can load up your bard with a smorgasbord of the best social interaction spells, from disguise self to detect thoughts to charm person to suggestion to dominate person. You name it, they got it. And within that, if they're not going to listen to your honeyed words, well, you got the magic to get through too.
That's the thing, though, is that we don't want to look at a class and say, well, they got spells, so they're the best in the game. Or, well, they have persuasion out the wazoo, so they're the best in the game. But the bard is both. The bard can approach a negotiation honestly and win.
Yes.
Or they can approach it from a spellcasting manipulator standpoint and win. They could be the master of disguise. They could be the master of deception. They could be the most honest bard in the world who only sings songs of truth and justice to convince people that what they are doing is just and right, and they will win.
Yep. And then you can play an elegance bard and kick it up to 11th gear. Or still really be good at it with almost any of the other bard subclasses, because you also have bardic inspiration. You can support your allies' attempts at this as well. You can do whether it's the glamour bard with all their charms, whether it's the lore bard just having that smorgasbord of supplemental skills as well to just bolster that up, or even at higher levels, then you get spells like glibness, which mean you can even lie through your teeth while someone is reading your thoughts. And there's so many options there. And I think what's really interesting about this is that even though a bard has a rather narrow spell selection because they have to choose their spells known, in my experience playing a bard, you can basically load up on all the essential social interaction spells, and you still have room in your spell selection for the combat spells that bards are good at. Like, you can take Disguise Self, and you can take Suggestion, and you can take Dominate Person, but you still have space in your arsenal to take Hypnotic Pattern and Healing Word and Fairy Fire. So it's interesting how the bard's spell list is somehow less of a restriction that you actually expect it to be, because even though they have a limited spells known, they have to commit to those spells known. It just turns out that the best bard spells on the bard spell list just happen to casually make them the best negotiators in the game, while still giving them lots of tools to assist in other combat roles.
As we land on an S ranking for the bard, I think part of the reason for this is that as you look at all of their skills and spells, there are 101 visible ways to talk your way into or out of any situation in the game. And they're just front and center when you look at the bard.
Yeah.
It's just there. So there's no doubt about it. You have to try so hard to build a bard that is a bad negotiator, that at their worst, they're an A tier.
I feel like if you build your bard to be a healer or a battlefield controller or a support, like if you build your bard around support or utility or investigation, you will still casually be better at negotiation than any other character could possibly be.
Yeah. Now, as we come to the Cleric, the Cleric's an interesting one, and I went back and forth a lot on this. At first, Cleric, wisdom-based spellcaster, probably dumping charisma, maybe not dumping.
But they're going to have insight, and insight can be good in negotiations.
Insight can be good, and this is where I started to dial back. They're also not only a full spellcaster, but they have the rare exception of being a full spellcaster who can change up their spell list on the fly, so that if they are going into a negotiation situation, they don't have to be like, did I prepare the right spells? They could, if you have a person in prison that you're trying to talk to, the Cleric could take a rest, take a bunch of mind reading, divination, zone of truth sort of spells, and come in packing heat.
Yeah, although I feel like a Cleric is still driven more towards the interrogator role. And that very much comes from the fact of spells like Command, spells like Zone of Truth. And you have to look to the other Cleric domains, like particularly the Knowledge domain, the Peace domain, and the Trickery domain, before you start to branch out in terms of those options. Interrogation is an important element of negotiation. It's a great scenario. But I still feel like you do have to build the Cleric that way. I feel like you have to choose the domain, you have to select the skills, you have to select the abilities. The options are there, but if you don't choose them, the Cleric is kind of in the same boat as the Artificer. I think they got a little bit more flexibility there.
I think they have a lot more flexibility now. I'm not giving them the highest ranking.
Yeah.
I'm going with a B, because I think that they are buildable. And the reason why they are above the Artificer is a half-caster.
Yeah. The half-caster thing makes a big difference. And the limitations on the infusions makes a big difference. I think Clerics range from C to... I think that a lot of Clerics on average are going to fall into the C range for Negotiator, but there is the potential to build them to be a good Negotiator, and I have seen the Cleric be the face of the party in the right campaign. So you know what? I agree with you. It's a B.
As you come to the Druid, we're in a similar boat to the Cleric with a wisdom-based spellcaster, but I personally feel like their spell list doesn't have as many options as the Cleric.
Speak with animals. They're the S tier at negotiating with plants and animals.
Yeah, that's yeah. Okay, we put that though into exploration and investigation.
Yeah.
They're really good at that.
I think it's a stretch at this point.
It's a stretch.
Yeah.
I think they're not without their merits. They're not as bad as some of the other classes. I think I'm feeling a C ranking for the Druid.
Yeah, I am too. I think it's an upward struggle. Once again, Druids have even less of a reason to invest in their charisma scores, by and large. I think that there are some spells there, But I think that you would really struggle to be the primary negotiator of your party with a druid.
Yeah. Carrying on with the fighter, I think we've said this a lot, like other than a fighter who I think, again, there's a cool trope of being the commander fighter who takes a bit of charisma, proficiency, and persuasion, and hey, look at you, you're the commander fighter. You can build a fighter to be a negotiator, kind of, but you're still only a mid-range negotiator, and I don't think the class presents that.
No, and I mean, we have seen things like there are now Battlemaster maneuvers that you can use to add to persuasion checks, and you could get persuasion as a skill. There are several subclasses that give you some attributes in this respect, but we're very far away from being able to make a fighter that is anywhere close to even, I think, what the Cleric can do.
I agree.
Right? Like I think that even if you took... Like, even if you want to go, oh, I'm going to build the Negotiator Battlemaster, or I'm going to play that Purple Dragon Knight, and I'm going to make my charisma my highest or my second highest ability score. Even if you took every possible thing that you could take to be the Negotiator as the fighter, it still comes up short.
Well, okay, let's be real here. Real talk. Your best avenue to be a Negotiator fighter is choosing Purple Dragon Knight. And now you've already made the worst choice you can make as a fighter. Take that, Purple Dragon Knight.
I mean, I guess maybe the Samurai might have some options. And I think even the Rune Knight, like there's possibilities. Like Wizards of the Coast has done a better job of injecting like a little handout. But a little handout is enough to, like, the handouts that the fighter class gets, let them participate in the social interaction.
They get participation awards.
Yes, they get a participation ribbon. It's not like they're going to be leading the charge in this case.
Are they participatory enough to warrant a C, or do you think it's a D?
I think that the participation ribbons will let you dig your way out of the D ranking. But overall, the class is a D.
Yeah, I think that we put them in the same boat as the Barbarian and the Artificer, where it's like you could find a way, but it's not what they're built for.
And it's going to be at the expense of the things that you can build as strengths. That's the problem, right? Is that if you want to choose the options that do make you good, like, yeah, you could you could take all your extra fighter feats and invest those into Actor and... You could take Actor and you could take Charisma Boost and you could get Fey Touched or something and stuff like that. But that's all coming at the expense of being good at what a fighter does. And that could still be an interesting and fun character. But even if you do all that, you're not even nearly as good as what the Bard gets for just showing up.
Yeah. If you build your fighter very purposely to be the Negotiator fighter and somebody else brought an average Bard, you're going to feel sad. Actually,
I think if you build a fighter to be a bard, and the bard player built their bard to be a fighter by being like a swords bard or a valor bard, they're probably going to have the stronger overall character than you.
Now, I don't want to glaze over the monk, but I feel like everything that I just said for the fighter applies for the monk as well.
There's participation ribbon class features, but a participation ribbon doesn't really pull you out of the D tier ranking. It just lets you participate.
I'm going to say the same thing I said for Barbarian. A lot of monk players I've seen at my table. They all have fun playing it. They're never really the one doing the talking. I played a monk. I tried to do the talking, but every time you were like, give me a persuasion roll, and I'm like, I've been talking too much, and now have to make this roll. And now you have to make the roll. And now it's gonna fail because I have like a +1.
Yeah, and I'm a fan of like giving the players the opportunity to make group checks so that these participation things can be a meaningful part of the negotiation experience. But ultimately, if you're talking about who is making the actual like high-end rolls on the difficult rolls and the difficult social interactions, the monk's just not going to be the one to do it ever.
As we move on to the Paladin, this is another one where I actually went back and forth on whether I was going to rank them high or middle.
A high ranking for a Paladin, I think, is justified by the fact that Paladins do have some spells that they mostly pilfer from the Cleric spell list. But unlike Clerics, Paladins have Charisma as their spellcasting ability, and they're encouraged to have a high Charisma score because they have so many other class features that rely on it. Beyond that, a Paladin doesn't actually get that much that actually augments their ability. And there's the classic trope of the paladin having to be the honest one.
That is a trope, and not all paladins are nice people. Let's be real here. And especially in 5th edition, you don't need to be lawful good all the time. Paladin is interesting and kind of a confusing one to rank for me because, having played a paladin, you are never not going to be okay at negotiation. Yes. You're never bad. You're never bad at it. You have charisma. Therefore, you're probably going to have persuasion. My paladins all have had persuasion of some sort.
But it's never been that high of a... Like, it's been like a +4 or +5.
Yeah, they don't have expertise, so they can't match the bard. They can't even really match... we're going to get to the rogue, but they can't match the rogue because expertise is so cool. The paladin has the benefit of always being good, but nothing in their class, except for a few minor features to specific subclasses, push them beyond being naturally good. I think I wanted to give them an A, but I'm ready to hear you possibly say that A is too high of a ranking.
I mean, this is, I think, the dilemma for me, because I feel like the paladin is like the step down from the bard. It's like the bard comes ready-made with everything you need to succeed. And with the paladin, everything you need to be a decent negotiator is there. It's just... you're not as incentivized to take your charisma to the maximum unless you're doing some sort of tricky build by multiclassing to Hexblade. You don't have any access natively to expertise or any other sort of those cheaty features that let you get a bonus. There are oaths, like the Oath of Redemption, for example, gives you the option to be really good because that actually has a channel divinity and a power that gives you a real bonus to your persuasion check rolls and the skill checks. And there are spells on the paladin spell list that will help you out with these things. At the end of the day, though, I feel like it hits a mid-range. And I think that every paladin gets a B as a negotiator just for showing up. But if you're actually going to try to build your paladin to be better than that, I think it's hard.
I actually do. As I've been saying this, I had A written down initially just because I was like, yeah, I played a paladin. They were the face of the party. And of course they were the face of the party.
Yeah.
Even though we were in the party with a bard, but I just tend to be the player who loves social interactions.
Yeah, exactly. You're
right.
right.
So that's my fault because... most of the people at the table, Joe was playing the bard, I was playing the paladin. Like, I don't know, we had this 1-2 punch sort of as the two faces of the party. Yeah. With the comic relief and the serious one. And we went back and forth. Yeah. But at the end of the day, that's just because I love playing a charismatic character. That's not because the paladin was doing me any favors other than being naturally charismatic. Can they be the face of the party? Yes. Is the negotiator necessarily the face of the party? No, it's something a little bit different, and I don't think the paladin actually has a lot of tools, so I'm willing to lower my ranking to a B.
I think you would not be wrong to give the paladin an
A.
But it's a low A or high B.
Yeah, it's really tough to land with the paladin because naturally good, but not inherently great.
Yeah, it's just the ceiling. The ceiling is lower. It's like the floor is higher, the ceiling is lower. So like all paladins are going to be good at negotiation, but you really have to choose the right spells and I think subclass to be great at it.
Yeah. And as we come to the ranger, rangers, I mean, again, take all the things I said about the fighter and the monk and apply them to the ranger. The ranger has some spell casting. Not a lot of those spells are designed to help you in social situations. They're explorers. They're good infiltrators. They're good at navigating. They're good at hunting monsters. These are all things that the ranger is really good at. Most rangers I see at my table are gruff woodsmen.
They do get some advantages with regards to favorite enemies and stuff like that, but it's a real stretch.
I think I gotta give them a D in the same way I gave the other classes a D. We could sit here all day and say, what if you built a ranger that took X, Y, Z? Yeah.
But once again, it's going to come at the expense of the things that they could be actually good at. Yeah. And I think that's where what we see a lot of these characters, where the classes that we're giving the D-rank negotiators to, the reason for this is not that they really can't do it ever. It's that you're going to have to give up a lot from your character's primary from the things that your character could succeed at in a primary capacity to gain this only at a secondary level at best.
When we look at the ranger, the areas that we would give a ranger an A in, you might actually be pulling those down by raising your negotiation to a B.
Yeah.
As we come to the rogue, this is an interesting one, and this has been a big, heated topic in this series.
The rogues have been a point of contention all through this ranking series, because I think the through line for the rogue in general has been that the rogues are great at skills. They're one of the only characters in the game that can get expertise in Thieves' Tools. They get expertise before anyone else, and they get a lot of skill proficiencies. But they don't necessarily have the spell casting and the other features to support those skills. So they're relying entirely on those skills. And that makes them really good to great, but not necessarily top tier.
I think that this is the thing, though, is the rogues are really good in a lot of categories. And I actually think negotiation is surprisingly one of them. Not necessarily because they have the best charisma, because they're not going to. Mm-hmm. But if you look through the subclasses presented to the rogue, there's more than one that kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudges and says, charisma shouldn't be your dump stat. It should be a middle tier stat.
I mean, as soon as you play an Arcane Trickster or a Swashbuckler, you immediately start having features that really support that. And I think you see a lot of rogue subclasses that immediately start bringing in some sort of social negotiation feature into it. I think that the best two rogue subclasses, the Swashbuckler and the Arcane Trickster, can absolutely be played as negotiators. You can invest in your charisma score, which is odd because an Arcane Trickster is an intelligence-based caster, but you actually don't need a good intelligence score for an Arcane Trickster. And that's one of those things that's weird to me. Should the Arcane Trickster be in a charisma-based spellcaster?
I would like it more.
I would too, but I feel like the Arcane Trickster, even just getting in the door with a middling charisma score and getting expertise in a bunch of the social skills, taking Charm Person, taking Suggestion, taking Detect Thoughts as one of their alternates, they actually have a lot of great options for how they do that, and they're going to excel.
I think that access to expertise is a huge boon in any class for being able to be good at the social pillar.
Yeah, because I think one of the things, and this is actually one of the things that we can talk about with the Bard, is that with social interactions, so often the Dungeon Master is the one that prompts the check. The Dungeon Master is going to be like, interesting you said that. Give me a persuasion check. And so oftentimes you don't necessarily have the ability to react with a spell. So you can't all of a sudden be like, oh, the Dungeon Master just asked me for a charisma check. So does that mean that I can stop everything now and cast Charm Person or Guidance? Or it's like, no, I've asked you for the check now. Those spells aren't reactions.
The other inherently good thing that rogues get that really is very specific to the rogue is at 10th level, they get that reliable talent, which means if you've taken expertise in persuasion or deception, you have a plus. I mean, my rogue right now at 11th level has a plus 13 to stealth. If instead of stealth, I decided that I wanted to go the route of charisma, and even my charisma, I think I have a plus 7 or 8 or 9 right now in persuasion. Mm-hmm. And I can't roll lower than a 10 because I have proficiency in persuasion.
And then with the bonus, you're always making
19.
20,
19 is my lowest persuasion roll.
And incidentally, bards don't get a feature like that unless they're casting the Glibness spell, which is an 8th level spell, or you're an Eloquence bard.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a really interesting dimension. It is a 10th level feature, so it's pretty late. But it makes the rogue really reliable as a negotiator. Not
only that, but I mentioned that the Artificer got a little thumbs up because of access to something like the Disguise Kit or the tools. Forgery Kit. And the rogue also has access to a lot of great tools. And if you take the Charlatan background, which is very fitting on a rogue, you get the Disguise Kit, and is it the Forgery Kit? You get the Disguise Kit. And I think that a rogue makes a great Master of Disguise, Manipulator, Charismatic, can't roll lower than a 10 on their Persuasion or Deception, depending on the way you go. and can take expertise, I'm willing to give the rogue an A.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I think one of the big things that undoes the bard in social interactions is there is a case that goes, sometimes you're in a social interaction and you don't have the opportunity to cast a spell because of the people that you are talking with see you cast a spell. They're going to be like, we're just having a conversation. What are you doing casting spells on me? And that totally sours the negotiation at that point. It's different, I think, of course, if you're doing something like Detect Thoughts or using a spell like Enhance Ability. But if you're casting a spell on someone else, it can sour it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think I can confidently give the rogue an A.
Now, it's interesting that you brought up how spellcasting is a very visible element, because as we come to the sorcerer has the ability to take subtle spell and can suddenly cast their spells in the middle of negotiations.
I think this makes them an automatic A.
I agree. The sorcerer,
Subtle
full
spell
spellcaster,
so
charisma based. They have a lot going for them. Again, I'm playing a sorcerer who has deception and persuasion, I believe. Mm-hmm. And now I finally have subtle spell.
I mean, I guess the argument is that because you have to choose subtle spell, it is the definition of B, that you have to choose it as your meta magic. But it's just such a good meta magic.
Even if you don't take subtle spell, the sorcerers still land in a really safe space because they are designed to be really good at charisma and they have access to full spell casting. So you're going to end up with a few spells that can be used for manipulation.
I think especially the existence of Metamagic Adept, which lets you choose 2 extra meta magics, really makes the choice of packing subtle spell a lot easier for all sorcerers.
Yeah.
Because I think every sorcerer now is just going to want to take like 2 extra meta magics. It's amazing as a feat. So yes, technically you have to build for subtle spell, but it's sticking right out there.
It's
it's
there.
Yeah.
Your spellcasting's there, your charisma's there, your proficiencies are there. Everything's there to make you good at negotiating. And I don't think... Yes, you have to build for it, but as opposed to being like, how am I going to build this sorcerer to be a good negotiator? You just look at the sorcerer and you go, oh, I can be a good negotiator.
Yeah. And you have a much more restricted spell list. But, interestingly enough, the Clockwork Soul has one of those abilities that lets them turn a roll into a 10. So they kind of have a cheaty way to get reliable talent.
Yeah, that's one subclass.
Yeah,
but yeah,
but even the Aberrant Mind also really solves the spell selection issue too.
Yeah.
And the Aberrant Mind actually has the subtle spell thing built in to them as one of the features for their spells. So no, I think the Sorcerer is a solid A. And in the same token, I think the Warlock is too.
I think with the Warlock having access to invocations, the charisma-based spellcaster, they have a very tricky spell list.
Yeah.
So they're a little bit more the maniacal manipulator, and they can be, we've seen it at our table, just like the Bard, they can be the master of disguise really, really well. Mask of Many Faces is a great choice if you want to play the Negotiator Bard. And they have access to charm, illusion, enchantment, all the fun stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think that they're an A as well.
Yeah, and I think that when we look at all these classes that we've given A to, part of the reason why the Bard becomes the S is because the Bard takes the best elements of the Rogue, the Warlock, and the Sorcerer in terms of all of the social interaction stuff and just has it. The Warlock and the Sorcerer and the Rogue have their own little secret weapons, like Reliable Talent or Subtle Spell, but the Bard is kind of getting the big picture of the whole thing.
Yeah.
The Wizard.
The Wizard, interestingly enough, I give a lot of praise to the Wizard in most cases because they have an extensive spell list, and really you can build your Wizard to do whatever you want. But I don't think they have as much going for them as the Sorcerer, the Warlock, the Rogue, or the Bard.
No, it's because they're an intelligence-based spellcaster. And unlike the Artificer, they have a much wider range of enchantment and illusion spells to select from. But here's the thing I think with the Wizard, and this is why I'm more inclined to give them a lower ranking. The Wizard's spells, in terms of social interaction and negotiation, drive the wizard towards a manipulator or a spy. So the wizard can sit back and cast detect magic while the bard is talking to somebody else while they've got enhance ability up on themselves. But the wizard in that role is participating in the negotiation, but is still kind of not the primary. Like they're there for a different purpose. The wizard could cast suggestion on somebody, but that is a brute force technique for negotiation. And while that's very powerful, there's a lot of times where you need to negotiate in good faith. And you can't just cast suggestion on somebody.
The wizard, and I don't care if you hate the sequel trilogy, but the wizard is Kylo Ren grabbing into the mind of Rey, being like, I'm going to find the information I need.
Yeah.
Which doesn't feel like a good negotiation.
No, it's not.
You leave that negotiation being like, wow, that guy was a jerk.
Yeah, and so the wizard's brute force technique for negotiation, and it's worth noting that the bard, sorcerer, and warlock all could do this too. It's just that if the bard, sorcerer, and warlock need to fall back on making a good persuasion roll, they can. The wizard is not going to be able to do that.
No. So I think I'm going to give the wizard a C. And I'm going to give them a decent C because they have access to a great spell list. So if you decide that you want to be the brute force negotiator, you can be. Divination wizards have a lot of ways to gain insight and intel to better talk to somebody. And really, if we want to give the wizard an extra point, depending on how your dungeon master rules this, knowledge-based skills could potentially be useful in a negotiation.
Yes, they could, but I feel like, again, it's one of those group check scenarios where I really like devising negotiation scenarios where the players have to kind of hit the 3 pillars of argument. Like they have to do an emotional argument, an intellectual argument, and an ethical argument, right? It's like the logos, ethos, pathos style of argumentation. And so that's where the wizard has the opportunity to be the logos and to say, like, yes, here's my logical argument. But again, you can't win an argument through logic. You can't reason someone into a position that they didn't reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. And yeah, if facts were all you needed to convince people of your point of view, things would be great, but they're not. So
the wizard's a C, and you can do it. You can build a decent negotiator wizard, but it's not their forte the way the charisma-based classes are. So up on screen right now, you're going to see Monty and my final rankings. A few disagreements, and a few times we persuaded each other of our rankings. But all in all, there are some obvious winners here, and I think as we move on to the community votes on who they thought the best negotiator was, it's pretty clear that the votes are basically in line with our viewpoint.
It's the biggest landslide ever.
But I think that when we look at this, Bard definitely is the winner, 100%, no questions. But we should note that the Sorcerer, the Warlock, and the Paladin all got a decent chunk of votes. The Rogue comes in 5th place, which is actually interesting because I think the Rogue for me might be higher than the Paladin in some cases. Although again, this is the thing, is I think the floor and ceiling of the Rogue is much vaster, so they can be lower than the Paladin, but they can be higher than the Paladin.
Because the thing is that most rogues, when they choose their first 2 expertise, they choose stealth and thieves' tools or stealth and acrobatics. Then the next time they get expertise, maybe they choose deception or perception or investigation. I've seen a lot of rogues that dump their charisma and don't bother with the charisma skills at all. And I think that that's in a lot of people's minds.
And I think this is why, like, we gave the Rogue an A, and I think we're being pretty gracious there because I actually think that there's a lot of times that you can build a Rogue that isn't a good negotiator.
Yeah, but all the pieces are there.
Yeah, and so I fully agree with the way the community voted here.
I do too.
I think they nailed it. So this has been a look at who the best negotiator in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is. Tell us your thoughts on who the best negotiator in the game is in the comments below.
We have an amazing Patreon community that helps make all the work we do here on YouTube possible. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, please consider joining that community by following the links in the description below.
And if you want to see me trying to be a negotiator as both a rogue and a sorcerer, you can check out our live play in the Worlds of Drakkenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we got plenty more tier ranking videos for all the classes and subclasses in D&D 5e right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
in the dungeon.